Well, we're back on live. Just for clarification, Mr. Kushner, we have Mr. Cherniak in the other room. Well, joining us, we also have Mr. Ashkander. What about Mr. Streisfield? What's the instructions, if any?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Streisfield called a short time ago to indicate that he was stuck in traffic. There was apparently a major accident on the 401 East. My understanding is that he is going to attempt to participate remotely via a telephone Zoom connection, but he has indicated that he has no objection to Mr. Cherniak proceeding with his cross-examination, whether he's able to join us remotely or not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cherniak.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, this Saad, can I say something before Mr. Cherniak starts?
What's up?
I'd like to ask the same relief that Mr. Streisfield got for his NEC, that I can question the witness after him in September. That will make a difference in my case, so I'd know all that approve or disapprove of the city. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I approve or disapprove of the city. What's your?
I'd like to adjourn my questioning of today.
Why?
Because I need to know what's Mr. Streisfield's client's position regarding the city. And I need to see his questioning before I can continue my questioning.
Mr. Kushner.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, the city cannot agree to that. We were prepared to agree to it with Mr. Streisfield for the very specific purpose that was put to us, which was to facilitate an experts meeting between his planning witness and Ms. Anderson with a view to possibly narrowing or resolving issues in dispute, particularly as they relate to the proposed modifications that arose from the settlement with TSMJC, which there has only been a limited opportunity to review. So for that limited purpose, and despite the highly unorthodox nature of the request, we were prepared to accommodate for that purpose. Respectfully, we're not prepared to accommodate it for a generic request to defer cross-examination. The appropriate time to conduct it is here and now in our respectful submission.
No, I disagree because...
So, Mr. Ashkander, hang on a minute.
Yes, sir.
What's your response, Mr. Ashkander?
Sorry, sir, should I, my apologies, sir. Do you want to hear me before Mr. Ashkander? Because he might want to respond to me.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. So my client is obviously concerned about questions that Mr. Ashkander asks, because Mr. Ashkander opposes the city's position and my client supports 100% the city's position. It is entirely inappropriate for Mr. Ashkander to always want to go dead last, to always want to rely on the good work of other people when he, as an appellant, is supposed to have his own position. Whether he has a lawyer or not, he's supposed to have his own position. He's supposed to come to the hearing prepared to know what evidence he wants to lead and what questions he wants to ask in cross-examination. And it's not appropriate for him to always rely on the fact that he is self-represented. Yes, he is self-represented, but he chose party status. He chose to maintain party status. He chose to continue to oppose my client's position in this hearing. I'm entitled to know what his questions are before I put my witness on the stand, who's going to be going up next. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kagan. Mr. Ashkander, briefly.
Yes, sir. My opposition was to the city, and I've informed all parties and the city and the LPAT that part of that is actually whatever agreements or settlements that's going to support the city. So I do need to know the case or the cases now that's being changed as we go. It's only fair for me to know the cases, please, sir. and I'm not asking for anything more. It's Mr. Sreifield who chose to adjourn his questioning till September. And I don't think it's going to be a big waste of time if my questioning would come after Mr. Streisfield's questioning.
Thank you. Colleague and I are concerned about your request now. It comes without any agreement with the city or anybody else. I think the agreement with Mr. Streisfield in his case has some considerable merit in getting some issues resolved. I don't think we're going to accept your position. We're going to have you right after Mr. Cherniak this morning. Thank you.
Please, sir.
No, just if you standard. That's it. Mr. Cherniak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going just to begin by advising you of an agreement with the city. In light of Mr. Streisfield's cross-examination in September, there is a possibility that he will become a supporting party of the secondary plan, or his client will be. If that should happen, we've agreed that he's not going to go over in his friendly cross-examination the same issues that I've been dealing with here, essentially as an attempt to respond to the cross-examination. And that's agreed with the city and with Mr. Streisfield. And hopefully the city can confirm that.
I can confirm that, Mr. Chair. Well, it never hurts to dream. I do think the scenario Mr. Cherniak has suggested is probably unlikely, but we're all holding out hope for the best. So if that does come to pass, I confirm the agreement as he's described it.
Mr. Cherniak, you're on.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Ms. Anderson.
Good morning, sir.
So I'm going to start by, I have to share my screen, please. Okay, seems to be allowed now. So I'm going to start. This is the YRA document book, tab 13. And so this was prepared by Mr. John Lee with the YRA. And I'm not going to be upset if you say no. Have you taken the time to confirm whether you agree that these numbers are accurate?
I have not.
Okay, and that's perfectly fair. And Mr. Lee will give his evidence and examination, and either he's right or wrong. So for the purposes of these questions, I'll just ask you to assume that he's done the math correctly.
That's fine.
Thank you. So if this document is accurate, this is Yonge and Eglinton, right?
Yes.
And it has a subway stop going north-south, and there's soon going to be an LRT east-west, right?
Yes.
There's also a major bus station there.
Yes.
And it seems that the density, according to this map, in any one neighborhood surrounding that station does not actually get higher than 359 hectares. Do you see that? Or sorry, 359 residents and jobs per hectare. Residents
yes.
per hectare, residents, not residents. And
yes, and this is based on census data, as is indicated. So it would not be a reflection of what is existing and planned for that location.
right.
So as it relates to the 2016 census data, assuming that Mr. Lee's references are correct, it is reflective of the 2016 census data, yes.
Okay. And last night you were going to confirm the number of residents and jobs per hectare in the proposed KDA. Were you able to do that?
Yes, I was. So there are two references, I believe, to that number. And probably the easiest reference to assist the members is in the staff report, the May 13th staff report. And it is found at page,
I'll pull that up.
that would be helpful, thank you. It's page 11 in the staff report. I'm not sure of the corresponding page in the tab.
Here we go.
Thank you. And scrolling to the last paragraph, actually the second last paragraph and the very last paragraph. And this is under the heading in the staff report, just for reference, related to changes to provincial policy, and then specifically in this section, major transit station areas. And in this paragraph, staff is referring to regional council endorsing their intensification background report, which actually we've been discussing in terms of station delineations and minimum densities. And it goes on to state that increasing, and I'm reading from the last paragraph, increasing the KDA's overall maximum density to 3.84 FSI is recommended in the proposed modifications, referred to Appendix A, and implementing zoning bylaw would result in the KDA being planned at an estimated gross density of 510 residents and jobs combined per hectare at full build out within the proposed 26.8 hectare area of the KDA. And it then references that that's approximately 10% of the total land within the 800 meter radius of the BRT. And I recall yesterday we had the map where we had the radius and we showed an area for the MTSA that was much larger than the KDA itself. And that is the reference here to that larger 800 meter area. And then it speaks to the planned densities that remain in the MTSA area and within the designated neighborhoods. These are the areas outside, and it references those areas at being 220 and 140 respectively. And the breakdown of that number, Mr. Cherniak, is found in, I believe.
I'm going to come to the breakdown later. I was just
sorry.
looking for the overall number.
Yes, that is the number.
And when we're looking at 220, if you go to the entire MTSA, would it be fair to say at this point we don't know what the plan is yet for the entire MTSA?
There's the current plan as it's approved today.
We don't know what it will be through the OP review process.
In terms of the boundary delineation, the exact boundary delineation?
Or even what the plan will say should happen within the entire MTSA as opposed to just the KDA.
In terms of the MCR work, that is still to come, yes.
Okay, so thank you. So I'm going to go back to our graph here. And although I suspect I know your answer, I will ask you, are you concerned at all that that density of 510 residents and jobs per hectare is higher than it seems to be in any of these neighborhoods around Yonge and Eglinton?
No, and if I could just clarify, I'm not concerned with respect to the proposed residents and jobs. Again, this is a reference to just residents based on the 2016. It's not reflective of residents and jobs. So it would not include the non-residential gross floor area that is to be balanced at 20%.
Right, and Mr. Lee has put the number 422 residents for the KDA. So again, if we assume he's right about that, it is still higher.
In turn, yes.
Okay, and your answer is that it doesn't concern you?
No.
Okay. So I'm now going to go to tab 15 of the YRA documents. So this is another one. When you first look at it, it's not clear what it is. But I have done, I will explain what it is.
Okay.
This actually is a direct, it's been copy and pasted from Statistics Canada's website. And I'm just going to follow a link I have to it to show you that it's a copy and paste. I'll have to wait a moment while it loads here. Okay, and I suppose I have to. So it's a little bit awkward because I don't think people's screens are large enough to compare one beside the other right now. But I will at least show you and then ask you to trust me that I'm telling you the truth. If I can figure out, oh, here we go. You share. So I'm going to share the whole screen because I think that makes it easier. So hopefully you see the website now that I'm on.
Statistics Canada, yes.
Okay. And you have these numbers at the side.
Yes,
You have, it shows the territory, the population. It's all based on the 2016 census.
yes,
Population density per square kilometer, and it's been
Yes.
sorted from highest to lowest.
yes.
And please believe me or assume that it shows the same numbers that Mr. Lee showed.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to hand up, because these numbers at the left obviously are not helpful, I've printed out just, I think, 5 of the top examples of what these numbers are referring to, their maps. So if I could hand up printed copies to the tribunal, and I'll be able to open them on my screen for everybody else. This is in support of tab 15, sorry. This is in support of tab 15. It will have to be a new exhibit, and I will email all the parties the actual PDF of these same pages.
Mr. Cherniak, it's Mr. Kagan. If you could just describe the exhibits for me so I can update the exhibit list.
Sorry, I only caught the end of that.
If you could just describe the exhibits for me as you mark them so that I can put the right description on the exhibit list.
I think you can call them maps of the geographic names.
Is it okay if I take my job? Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I hope you don't mind. Very warm in here.
Sorry, Mr. Cherniak, maps of the geographic what?
Geographic name.
Name.
Yes, it's referring to the column on the screen.
Okay. $39.
39.
And Mr. Cherniak, it's Mr. Kagan again. How many maps are there?
I believe it was 5. Sorry, I have to change the way I share. Is it 7? Sorry. Okay. So the first line here is Jamestown, 82,000 people. I don't think we need to deal with that because it's obviously an anomaly. Would you agree with me?
I'm not sure what you mean by an anomaly.
Well, just if you look at the population density, it's so much higher than everything else. It's really not relevant to what at least my purposes. So I'm not going to ask you about it. But the next densest community per square kilometer is what you're looking at here is the east side of Yonge Street between Shepherd Avenue and Church Avenue. And it seems to go about 1 block to the east. And you can see how high the density is per square kilometer there.
Yes, I see that.
So according to this chart, it is number 2 after St. Jamestown. The next one is further north on the east side of Yonge. So we had Shepherd to Church. Now we have Church to Finch, right? And if you look within, if you take these 2 maps together, what we're looking at is 3 subway stops, right?
Yes.
Sorry, 3 north-south subway stops and the start of the Shepherd line going east.
On
at the
Yonge
very
Street,
edge.
yes.
Okay. So this part of Toronto isn't comparable to Yonge and Bernard, is it?
Sorry, this part of Toronto is not comparable?
From a planning point of view, it's not a similar sort of location, is it?
I'm not sure. I mean, there's so many elements to comparables, so I'm not sure I can respond to that without doing some research.
Would you agree with me that you can't say that something is appropriate at Yonge and Bernard because it exists at Yonge and, well, in these 2 areas that we've looked at?
Well, Mr. Cherniak, You're referencing existing residential population, and the KDA plan is planned intensification for the longer term. So you're asking me to determine whether or not the existing densities in these areas are appropriate in relation to the future planned KDA secondary plan. They're two totally different things. And if I were to do the appropriate comparison, I would have to look at all of these areas to determine what the future planned population is based on the requirements of the province. So that would be a helpful comparison as opposed to what's existing today without any planning context.
So I'm just going to show you I'm back to Mr. Lee's prepared table here. He has put where he believes the Bernard KDA on the 2020 revision fits into the table.
Of the existing population density from the census.
That's right.
Yes.
So we're potentially talking about, when we look at these two maps, what the Yonge and Bernard KDA might look like in 20 years, right?
So again, he's identifying based on the long-term plan density where the KDA would fit based on the census reporting from 4 years ago and not in comparison to the plan densities in these and other areas going forward.
That's right.
So his reference here is showing future plan density in comparison to something reported from 4 years ago. And so as he's shown it here, I assume his math is correct, but I don't know what I can extrapolate from that other than it's a comparison of something that existed 4 years ago to what is being planned beyond 2041 for this area.
I'm not trying to trick you. I don't disagree with anything you
No,
said. I just want to make the point that, you know, based on what those areas looked like in 2016, you can look at where the Yonge and Bernard KDA is planned to go. That could be what it looks like in 20 years, right?
In terms of the number, that's the number. And in terms of putting it into comparisons that are not comparable, I'm not sure what opinion you'd like me to provide on that other than the one I provided.
I'm going to go back to the chart. I'm not going to keep asking you the same question, but I do just want to show what some of the others' neighborhoods are here. So the fourth one down. Nope. I'm not sure what happened. I'll try clicking on it. And you're seeing the map now, right? Or
no. Oh, yes, it's
map.
loading. It's loading now.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Well, that's interesting. That's different than what I printed out last night. And I don't know where it's come from. Okay, so I'm going to have to, I'm going to ask you to believe me that what I'm going to show you is what I printed last night. Okay, so the next one down, and this is what's going to be emailed to all the parties. That was what we just looked at. And it is the same area that was just on the screen, actually. It's for a Yonge Street from Bloor south to Gloucester,
Yes.
and east to Ted Rogers Way, which turns into Jarvis.
Yes.
Okay. And are you seeing everything? So you're seeing the internet now again?
I'm seeing map 352000249.
Okay. Next, we have two from Montreal, so I don't think they're particularly relevant. And then we have, that's Davisville on the north there,
Yes.
bordered by Yonge and Mount Pleasant, and it goes down to the Mount Pleasant Cemetery. And that's also right on a subway station, right, Yonge and Davisville?
Yes.
And I didn't say it, but obviously we know that at Bloor and Yonge, there's a subway station.
Yes.
Okay. So you've already given your opinion, and on other locations, I assume it will be the same for the
That's
second
correct.
two locations we looked at, that you can't really compare the statistics in 2016 versus the planned future, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So so I'm moving on to something else now. After council decided to revisit the secondary plan just over a year ago, staff eventually held a public open house in December 2019, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to go to, and everyone sees why the reset. So this is one of the slides that staff provided at that public open house. It's tab
Yes.
30, consecutive page 2389. And you see it's titled Why the Reset, right?
Yes.
So this slide, what staff are doing is they're tying their reasons for the reset back to the council resolution from May 2019, right?
Yes, in the description, the whereas, yes.
So they are starting from a presumption that there will be increased heights and densities, or at least a goal, I should say, a target of increased heights and densities.
Yes, I'm just going to minimize the, so I can see the full slide. Yes.
Okay. One of the important priorities was to keep Richmond Hill Center at the top of the intensification hierarchy.
Yes.
Do you agree that's an appropriate goal?
Yes.
Okay. And in your opinion, does the proposed KDA from 2020 keep Richmond Hill Center at the top of the intensification hierarchy?
So I have provided my opinion with respect to the current proposed modifications for the KDA, which are planned to provide for the full build out, as we've heard, with the overall maximum FSI at 4 and the built form policies to address height and to address the MTSA minimum density targets. The Richmond Hill Center KDA, as it is provided for in the 2010 plan, is under review. And it's my opinion, as I've provided to the members, that that evolving policy framework will address the Richmond Hill Center as an urban growth center through the MCR process that is underway. And we'll maintain that goal, but again, it's not static to preclude the KDA to proceed as it is proposed.
So Ms. Anderson, it's up to you how you answer these questions to an extent, as Mr. Kussner would remind me, but I will put it to you that I'm not asking you to repeat your direct evidence. I'm trying to get at specific opinions that may correspond to your direct evidence. You don't need to explain why if you've already said it, and it'll be a lot faster if we go that way. So my question is, in your opinion, does the proposed KDA keep Richmond Hill Center at the top of the intensification hierarchy?
Does the proposed KDA secondary plan put it at the top?
Keep Richmond Hill Center at the top of the intensification hierarchy. That's one of the goals.
And my answer is yes, in accordance with the current plan.
And you've already given evidence that the official plan in Richmond Hill requires the KDAs to have less intensification than Richmond Hill Center. Is that right?
That's correct.
So I'm going to go to that now. That was paragraph 9 here, 3.1.3.9. Right?
Yes.
Okay, and I thought I heard in your direct evidence you advised that some policies will require update and review. Do you remember that?
Policies of the Part 1 plan or the KDA plan?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I wasn't sure which policies you were referring to.
I believe I provided my opinion that in any implementation of a secondary plan or a zoning bylaw, there's often the requirement for amendments to the parent plan. That was my reference, yes.
And in your direct evidence, did you advise which parts of the parent plan you thought would need to be updated and reviewed?
Those are the proposed modifications that have been presented to the panel.
So the ones that are essentially agreed with TSMJC and some of the other landowners, right?
There were a number that were modified and a number that were accepted, so they withdrew their appeal. Yes.
Are there any modifications to the Part 1 plan beyond that you think will be required? Or
No.
sorry, updates and reviews?
No.
Okay. Now, you know that do you know that the official plan shows the maximum height at Richmond Hill Center is 40 stories?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll just go to that. So the way that we arrive at that first is here.
Yes.
So Richmond Hill Center will, and that is policy 3.1.3.7B. And that advises that Richmond Hill Center will accommodate the highest level of intensification in the
Yes.
town, now city, including the greatest height and density. You can then go to, and I'll go there after I read out the number, 4.2.1.23. I didn't get my page reference right. Page 639. A little short here. So that's page 639 in the document book, tab 8, paragraph 23 here. The following height requirements shall apply to development within the area of the planned integrated transit hub, and that's the highest densities and heights in the official plan in Richmond Hill, right? As of 2010.
Yes.
As of before this hearing.
Yes.
Okay. And the maximum building height is 40 stories.
Yes.
Okay. So if the KDA doesn't have that maximum building height within it, how is it not going beyond the highest heights at Richmond Hill Center?
If the KDA does not have a maximum building height,
Yes.
the building heights are provided through a different approach. So there is a minimum building height in some portions of the 4 stories. And the maximum building heights will be controlled through the policies and the implementing zoning bylaw. The control, however, is related to FSI, which is being maintained at a maximum of 4 overall. And so the controls that are currently put in place for the KDA are, in my opinion, appropriate. And as I have noted, do not preclude the Richmond Hill area of continuing to be at a minimum density of the 200 and beyond.
To keep Richmond Hill Center at the is the highest heights in Richmond Hill, wouldn't you have to give Richmond Hill Center the same policy-based height regime that you're proposing for the KDA?
Not necessarily. You can also provide for increased FSI, as is the case, and you can also ensure with the MCR that that approach could be considered, as I mentioned, in an evolving policy framework. Staff and council have the ability to address a common approach across all of the intensification areas.
So I take it you would not agree that by allowing a policy-based height regime in the KDA, while Richmond Hill Center remains limited to 40 stories, that you are that this proposal would conflict with council's resolution?
No, I don't agree.
Okay. And you would not agree that it's a conflict with the official plan either?
No, I provided evidence to the contrary.
And you would also give the opinion that the secondary plan does not need to explicitly refer to this potential conflict in order to amend, to whatever extent it would amend the Part 1 plan?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I think you've given evidence that the official plan contemplates that the Yonge and 16th Avenue KDA should also be higher and denser than the Yonge and Bernard KDA. Is that right?
I referenced the policies, yes, that refer to the hierarchy and that speak to the 2 KDAs and the Yonge and 16th being of a higher intensification, yes.
And you've also given the opinion that the proposed modifications to the secondary plan will keep this Yonge and Bernard KDA is the third most developed. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So, page 6.
Sorry, can I'm just, something you just said. I don't think I said we'll keep. I said it's currently planned for the density as is proposed, but there is nothing through the evolving policy process that precludes those others from maintaining the goal. So that, I just want to frame my response. I don't think I said keep. It's not going to restrict those other areas from coming forward and maintaining that goal or having that goal as it currently exists.
So I'm going to your witness statement here, and I'm looking for, paragraph 7. So I had made my notes from the original one, not the redacted one, but this is the redacted statement that we're looking at. Here it says the vision for the KDA secondary plan is set out in section, and everyone sees this on my screen, 12.1.2 continues to provide for the third most intensely developed area in the city after Richmond Hill Center and the Yonge and 16th KDA.
Yes.
So you do say that
Yes.
you don't use the word keep, but it's the same concept. Is that a yes?
Don't use the word keep. The language is the language.
Okay, that's fine. So now I'm going to go to another part of the official plan.
The part 1 plan.
Yes, and let me, sorry. Oh, there we go, 84. Okay, and you brought us to these sections earlier, so it's
Yes.
4.4.1, 6 and 7. So the part that I'm having trouble with is that the proposed changes will keep the density at Yonge and 16th as between 2.5 FSI and 3.0 FSI, right?
The proposed changes to 4.4.6 sub A includes the existing provision and goes on to state that the overall minimum and maximum FSI for specific blocks within a KDA or for a KDA overall may be revised through the development approval of a secondary plan for that KDA. So that is the change, although the initial language remains the same.
So it would allow for a Yonge and 16th KDA that increases FSI beyond 3.0, but it doesn't actually increase the FSI beyond 3.0 in that area, right?
That's the intent of the policy, yes. It provides that clarification.
So until and unless that change is made, if these proposed changes are adopted, the Yonge and Bernard KDA will have a higher FSI than Yonge and 16th, right?
Well, yes, the change cannot be made without the new secondary plan or an amendment. That's correct.
So if the proposed secondary plan from 2020 is adopted, then the Yonge and Bernard KDA will have a higher FSI than Yonge and 16th, right?
Yes, as is permitted by this modified policy.
Okay. So how does that put it third on the hierarchy after Yonge and 16th?
Again, in relation to the policies in the plan, in terms of setting out the goal of the hierarchy, that is maintained, again, as I mentioned in my evidence, through the evolving policy framework, and it is not intended to preclude the Richmond Hill Center or the Yonge and 16th from achieving that level in the hierarchy.
Okay. So I'm gonna move on. I have one more official plan policy I want to take you to. I don't believe you went to this in your direct evidence, but if I'm wrong, I apologize. So it's 3.4.1.39.
Sorry, 3 point. Page 371. No, I don't believe I did. So I'm happy to review that.
Okay. So this says development within the centers and corridors. Centers and corridors includes the KDA, right?
Yes.
Shall be designed to.
And I'm not sure, sorry, Mr. Cherniak, if you can just, it looks like a portion of that matter is still under appeal. And
It says approved by OMB.
no, but above that, the box still contains the number 39. I'm not sure.
39A is.
Yes,
Okay, but not B.
correct.
Provide built form that maintains a well-proportioned human-scaled street wall, minimum and maximum building heights,
Yes.
including maximum podium. So does that not require that a maximum building height be set in the Yonge and Bernard KDA?
It requires consideration for minimum and maximum building heights within the KDA, and the KDA does provide for minimum and maximum building heights.
So your opinion is that the policy-based height regime is the same as a maximum, or it is a form of maximum building height?
Correct. And if I can just also qualify, there is a specific maximum building height with a metric for the neighborhood edge area within the KDA.
Right. Well, I'm not challenging that. I'm talking about the corridor in the interior corridor areas. Okay, so thank you. You heard Mr. Theodore's evidence, right?
Yes.
And are you prepared to adopt his evidence on the height issue, including what he said under cross-examination and re-examination?
If you can reference specifically what you're referring to, that would be helpful.
What I'm trying to do is avoid asking you the same questions that I asked him. So, you know, except to the extent that your direct evidence differs, are you prepared to accept what he said so I don't have to go over those same issues with you?
If there's a question related to height, as I provided evidence, I'm quite content to respond to your cross-examination questions in relation to height as they relate to the policies and the land use policies. I did convey that in relation to Mr. Theodore's evidence on many items that I agreed and conferred. So I'm not sure exactly what.
So I spent 2 hours, or sorry, not 2 hours, an hour and 15 minutes
Yes.
cross-examining Mr. Theodore. I don't propose to go through that same hour and 15 minutes. So although I understand you can answer the questions, and I think your witness statement says this, you rely on his evidence except to the extent that you say
Yes.
otherwise.
In relation to his evidence as an urban design expert and the deployment of a built form approach to regulating height, I agree with that evidence.
Thank you. And we talked yesterday about how the 2017 plan is based on 3.0 FSI, right?
Yes,
And the maximum height along Yonge Street was 15 stories in the 2017 plan.
correct.
And in the interior character areas, the maximum was 10 stories.
Yes,
So what we know is that 3.0 FSI can be reached with those height limits, right?
and I believe yesterday I noted that that's an assumption based on modeling work that I have not reviewed or have not seen.
So you're not saying it's wrong, you're saying you can't confirm that it's right, I suppose.
That's correct.
So, but if we trust that the 2017 plan was right about it being 3.0 FSI, then we know that it can be reached with those height limits.
Based on assumptions that would have been made, those were the heights that were prescribed in accordance with the maximum FSI.
Okay. Now,
I just want to make a note. It's not clear whether the maximum FSI would have been achieved with the 15 and 10 stories. I don't have information to confirm that.
well, people who drafted the 2017 plan thought it did.
Not necessarily.
Okay. I'll ask one of them that later. Now, so for the sake of discussion now, assume that it is correct that with those height limits, you can reach 3.0. Now, I know that the calculations are not simple, and I'm not asking you to, you know, because you could say 4.0 FSI is a third higher than 3.0 FSI, right?
Yes, it is.
And therefore, if you can get to 3.0 with 15 stories, you can get to 4.0 with 20 stories. Now, I know it's not exact, but I mean, could you say that if you went up to 25 stories along Yonge Street and 20 stories in the interior character areas, the KDA could achieve 4.0 FSI?
Well, I'll answer by saying that I think there's a number of variations in terms of deployment of height through the built form policies, which could give you a number of variations in height and density within buildings that are connected by podiums. And I think we heard that evidence from Mr. Theodore. I think the 2017 plan, as it was established, was intended to simply transfer the official plan height restrictions into the KDA secondary plan at that time. And so it was using a prescriptive approach. The change is using a different approach to allow for more flexibility. And we heard considerable evidence about the benefits of that.
Right, and I do understand your evidence. I just, what I'm asking, what I'm trying to understand now is with heights of 25, and before I put that to you again, I'll just show you exactly why I'm using those numbers.
Sure.
In my client's document book, they've provided their proposed revisions to the KDA.
Yes.
This is at in their book tab B2. And we're looking at their proposal now.
Yes.
So I can tell you that, so what we have here is what they've proposed. So they took one of the city's maps and then
Yes.
Put the new numbers in. So they're proposing up to 25 stories along the center here, up to 20 stories in the interior character areas, and up to 10 stories in these other areas here. And I think, I want to be sure, this comes from the February 2020 draft
Yes.
from staff.
Yes.
So it's taking that map and adding new numbers on top of it. So again, that's why I'm asking you, do you think, or would you agree with me that these height limits would allow for overall density of 4.0 FSI? By the way, I'll just note, I think that these FSI numbers are different than what the city proposed as well. I'm not asking you to comment on those at this point.
So you're asking me whether this deployment of height and density.
No, just the heights. Assume that you can have the same densities that are proposed in the 2020 modifications.
So this is an approach that would limit height within those density caps. It is an approach.
And 4.0 could be reached with that approach.
Again, without doing the calculations, it's possible. Again, this is showing a prescribed deployment of height, prescriptive to the specific area. So it may be possible as one way to model height, if you were putting prescriptive limits on height within particular areas.
I'm going to go to staff's actual recommendations in February 2020 now. Just make sure I have the right tab here. So this is what in February 2020, after staff had done their reviews from June 2019, they did their public consultations. They put together a plan that they thought was best at the time, right?
Yes.
And what they proposed at that time was maximum heights of 30 stories along Yonge Street.
Yes.
Up to 25 stories in the, it looks like there's more than just the three areas we've been talking about in the light purple, up to 18 stories in some other areas.
Yes.
And then up to 10 stories even along so this is the 18 stories in here, this is the 10 stories out here.
Yes.
So obviously this would have achieved 4.0 FSI because that's what staff was proposing at the time,
Yes.
right? Okay. So we have here an alternative height regime that we know would not decrease the potential density of the KDA.
Based on, again, this deployment in those particular areas, I would agree.
Thank you. And that was page 4958 of the continuing record, tab 80 something, sorry. 82, I think. Yes, 82.
I just want to clarify for the record, my friend, I think, described it a moment ago as staff's recommendations. I don't think the evidence ever established that it was staff's recommendations. It was a proposal that was put forward for discussion at that time. That was the evidence.
Mr. Chair, I put a question to the witness and the witness responded. I thought she agreed with me. So that's, it's her evidence to give, not Mr. Cusson's.
Well, her evidence is in her witness statement and it says what it says, and she gave the evidence.
Her evidence is also what she says here, and you'll have a chance to re-examine. Can I ask Ms. Anderson, have you taken the time to review the draft February 2020 plan to determine whether it would meet the relevant policy tests?
Sorry. The question was, have I reviewed the proposed February 2020 plan?
Have you, to determine whether it would meet the relevant policy tests and constitute good planning?
No, not to the extent that I have the May 2020.
Are you able to give an opinion on whether the February 2020 draft plan would constitute good planning?
I would have to take the time to go through that plan and make that determination.
So no, I think, is a fair answer. Okay.
Have I done that? No. Yes, that's my answer.
So in February 2020, this plan, this draft plan that staff prepared for 4.0 FSI, I'm now on page 4933.
Yes.
Estimated up to 10,700 people and 2,700 jobs, right?
Yes.
And that was for 4.0 FSI.
Correct.
But then when we get to May 2020, oops. So the actual proposed secondary plan,
Yes.
the potential maximum for 4.0 FSI changes, not significantly, but slightly. It's now up to 11,300 people and 3,000 jobs, right?
Yes, there's a range.
So the maximum for 4.0 has gone up slightly. Do you have any idea why? Is it just because I guess the densities were changed in the, is there a reason why that change happened?
I assume, and again, I don't know the reason why, that is based on the calculations that are conveyed in the appendix. And there may have been some change to a particular assumption that would have caused that minor change.
Okay, so in the document book, we have tab 40. And that is the population and job forecast assumptions.
Yes.
It was Appendix H to the staff report in May 2020, right?
Yes.
Okay, so these highlights are mine. Would it be fair, am I right to understand that this was how the density estimates, or at least the residents and jobs estimates were arrived at?
Yes, my understanding is that staff prepared a forecast assumptions with a series, as you've shown, of total units. They also addressed total residents, total jobs, and had residents and jobs per hectare calculation. And then they had a series of blocks for which there were a number of tables. Yes.
So I'm on page 2933 of the continuing record. It was tab 40. And
Yes.
I'm going to draw your attention to this assumption down here. Assume 110 square meters per unit, reflective of current trends, market demand policy for 3-bedroom units in regions forecasting assumptions. So does that mean that the assumption was that all the units are going to be 3-bedroom units of this size when they forecasted residents?
Sorry, this is under total units.
Yes.
I believe they applied a per unit average.
We will get to that. I'm just asking whether they assumed 3-bedroom units before applying the number of residents per unit.
So it's difficult because it says assume 110, and then in brackets, as you say, it says reflective of current trends, market policy for 3-bedroom units, and the region's forecasting. So that 110, as I read this, is reflective of those 3 components.
And is it reflective of 3-bedroom units?
Again, it's reflective as an average to be applied based on all of those components.
So I'm going to put it to you that, because it might be helpful for some people, it is for me, 110 square meters is 1,184 square feet.
Yes.
I've done that. Okay. So is it your opinion that the average unit size in the GTA is 1,184 square feet?
I think this is referring to a number of things reflective of current trends, market demand, policy for 3-bedroom, and the region's forecasting.
So I'm not asking you to go back to the page yet. I'm asking you, is 110 square meters the average size of a residential unit in the Greater Toronto Area?
I don't know that.
Doesn't it sound higher than the average to you? You don't have any
Then
opinion
the
on that?
average size of a unit, I don't know. And it's a larger unit, but I don't know in terms of, you're asking me to compare the average size for a 3-bedroom unit, I would have to have that information. I don't know.
Hold on. You said that this isn't just a 3-bedroom unit. You said this goes beyond 3-bedroom units, I thought.
You asked me whether a 110 square meter unit is the average size of a unit in the GTA, and my answer was, I don't know.
And you'll agree with me, I hope I don't have to go to it, that only 5% of units in the KDA are required to be 3-bedroom units?
In the policies, I will agree, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to take you to back to the YRA document book, tab 21. So it's a newspaper article. It's not a scientific study. But I will show you that what it shows here is the trends of the size of the average unit.
Yes, I see
And
that.
what it shows was that we reached a maximum around 1990 of somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 square
Yes.
feet. And by 2016 to 2017, it was down below 650 square feet.
Correct.
That's obviously a lot less than the assumption in the city's estimates that we just looked at, right?
Mr. Cherniak, does your document indicate the source of this anywhere?
Well, there's a website here, and Mr. Lee is going to give evidence on the source, so we'll have to have him prove it.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
That's good. So I'm going to put it to you that if this is right, and the average size of a unit is actually under 650 square feet and not 1,183 square feet, that it seems that the city of Richmond Hill has underestimated the number of jobs that the proposed secondary, or sorry, the number of residents that the proposed secondary plan is going to create, right?
If the average number that's used here, again, assuming as they provided for total units, that it is 110 square meters, they have utilized that number. A lower number would yield a different calculation.
And if it's right that the number they've used is too high, that it seems to be 180%, 190% of the actual average, and they've underestimated the number of residents that they are going to end up living in the KDA as proposed, right?
Yes, but they have in their calculations used this as the reference number in their assumptions.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the holding provisions now. And before I do that, I'm going to pull up the decision of Vice Chair McCooch. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's in the joint document book or which exhibit number it is.
Sorry, Mr. Cherniak, this is in the, oh, you're pulling it up.
Yeah, so it's on the screen. It is an exhibit, right? Okay, so I don't know if we need the number right now, but this was Vice Chair's decision, and it says issues for hearing. It is noted that at the time of the May 26th CFO, these broad categories were generally identified as follows. So these are the issues for phase 1 of the hearing. And we have number 4, policies respecting the holding bylaw regime, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's now go back to the holding, or go to the holding provisions in the bylaw. And this is number 2. And we talked about this yesterday, whether it should be deferred to phase 2. The lifting of the H symbol will be subject to a requirement for prior approval, and it goes on. Would you agree with me that this is a holding regime policy?
Yes.
So as I understood your opinion yesterday, although it fits within the phase 1 category identified by the Vice Chair, you would still defer it to phase 2. And can you explain why you would do that?
I believe yesterday I indicated that my opinion on providing for these policies is that they are being deferred. And I'm not sure I'm in the panel's hands as to whether you would like me to revisit this in terms of providing an opinion on the appropriateness of these policies.
Well, so I objected to it being deferred, and Mr. Kussner's answer was that I could cross-examine you on why it should be deferred. So my question is, why do you say it would not, or do you say it would not be appropriate to consider this policy in phase 1?
So my response yesterday was in relation to this policy and the subsequent policy that specifically relates to the holding provisions being implemented in the bylaw. There are specific regulations in the bylaw that speak to attaining the non-residential floor area as provided in Schedule E, which is very specific to the holding provisions. And that matter is to be addressed as it relates to, I believe, the site-specific appeals. And also that matter, depending on the outcome of that matter, may impact or affect these policies.
So if this tribunal decides that it's going to deal with all the holding provisions on a KDY basis in phase 1, and those site-specific concerns alone can go to
Yes.
phase 2 without prejudice, do you
Yes.
have any concerns with this policy?
No, I do not.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe we marked the June 29. Can you hear me? That's right. I don't believe the June 29, 2020 decision was marked as an exhibit. Mr. Chair, I don't believe the June 29th decision has been marked as an exhibit.
I do not have copies to hand up, unfortunately, because, okay, good. Okay, you ready? So we've already discussed a little bit how the holding provisions work, and that they're lifted for under 10,400 residents and jobs based on some various studies that are, I think, common studies that builders would have to undertake, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I suppose the only study that would be different than normal is they would have to show that there are not more than 10,400 residents and jobs in the KDA at that time, right?
Yes, I believe there's a reference actually.
I don't want to know how they have to
Okay.
do it, just that they have to do it.
There is a clarification at the beginning of that section that is relevant to my response, though, and that is that it does refer to policies of the official plan and the secondary plan, which relates back to these particular policies. So there is that requirement to confirm that threshold is not being, that the proposed development is not going beyond that threshold.
And when we look at the number of residents and jobs, there are various scenarios, but once you are greater than 12,650 residents and jobs, and there's at least the modal splits are met, all the regional projects listed are done, and the Bathurst widening is done based on this proposal.
Yes.
It can go beyond 12,650 residents and jobs without any further hold, right?
In relation to the holding provisions, yes.
So if the city of Richmond Hill has underestimated the number of residents and jobs, then the total number of residents and jobs in the KDA after build out could be far higher than what the estimates that we see in the secondary plan, right?
No, I would not agree with that based on the modeling and assumptions that have been done. Again, this relates back to the maximum FSIs and the other controls on development.
What I'm asking you to do is assume that one of those assumptions, the number of residents and jobs that can fit into this area under 4.0 FSI was wrong. It's been underestimated. If that is the case, then the number of residents and jobs in the KDA could go beyond the maximum estimate that we see in these documents, right?
If the assumptions are incorrect,
Just the assumption on the number of residents and jobs that this plan could lead to as a maximum.
if the assumptions on the residents and jobs are wrong, could this number be higher? Yes.
Okay. And what I was showing you was that if my client and if what I'm proposing to you is accurate, that the city potentially should have been using 650 square feet condos as an estimate instead of 1,083 square feet condos as an estimate, then the total number that fit into this KDA could actually be significantly higher than the maximum estimate, right?
It would change the number if you were to use a different assumption, yes.
Well, I'm not talking about a different assumption. I'm talking about what actually exists on the ground 20 years from now. But I think we understand each other, so. And tell me if you disagree. But I think we understand each other, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just find which page I was on. Now, the proposed modifications that we saw yesterday from TSMJC would have the Bathurst Street widening condition removed if it is not part of York Region's plans. Is that correct?
Yes, if I can just pull up exhibit, I think it's 35. Yes, and that is through the notation that's been added.
I think
Sorry, the change that has been added.
maybe I should pull that up as well for everyone to see to make it easier. So the change we're talking about is sorry, tell me if I'm going too far. Do you know, should I keep scrolling down? Because I think you're looking at it, right?
I think you're referencing the table.
Right after the table.
Yeah,
Here we go. Okay.
there we are.
Should a future municipal comprehensive review or transportation master plan update indicate that this improvement is no longer required? So does that mean, it's already not in the 10-year plan, right?
I believe you had that evidence from Mr. Terzewski, yes.
But I gather that the region says somewhere that this is a project that it still anticipates in the future.
It's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so would this mean if it's just removed altogether as a potential future project?
Well, as stated, the clarification is through the future study, either the region's MCR work for the TMP work, if it's shown that that improvement is not required, then it would be removed. It would not be applicable.
So it's not just if it isn't in the region's 10-year plan. That's the, I wanted to be clear about that.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you may recall when I was asking questions of the transportation panel, Mr. Wong agreed with me or gave the opinion. And you know, why don't I go to HDR's report? I'll put it to you directly.
Sure.
And I need page 109. So we looked at this paragraph here. Based on the above results, it appears that 3.0 FSI would be the maximum supportable if additional road improvements beyond the 10-year capital program were not constructed. Now, when he says 10-year the additional road improvements beyond 10 years, I believe his evidence was that that is the Bathurst Street widening, isn't it?
I can't recall specifically his reference to that.
He did certainly state that he still stands by this paragraph, his opinion.
Yes, I recollect that, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to put it to you that the way I understood Mr. Wong's evidence is that if this Bathurst Street widening does not occur, then the KDA cannot realistically go beyond 3.0 FSI from a transportation perspective. And do you disagree with that?
I'm not sure I agree that that was his evidence, but again, we have the KDA before us that provides for the requirements to go beyond a certain threshold, which include the capital projects, as clarified in the modification.
Unfortunately, I have to say, if that was his evidence. Because my understanding was that that Bathurst Street widening is necessary to go beyond 3.0 FSI. And if that is the case, then would it not be appropriate under any circumstances to remove that Bathurst Street widening from the holding provision conditions?
Just for the record, sir, I think there's disagreement that that was in fact his evidence. We don't agree that that was his evidence.
I understand that. I'm asking, there are other people that have been watching, they may have a different recollection.
Okay, I just want to be clear for the record that my friend is asking the witness to assume evidence that in our submission is contrary to what the evidence actually was, for the record.
That's
We'll
fine.
note that.
So should I repeat my question?
Yes, if you could.
So if you assume that Mr. Wong, or even the HDR report as it's written, says that the Bathurst Street widening is required to go beyond 3.0 FSI, then it would be inappropriate to remove it from these holding provisions, wouldn't it?
If it were the evidence that to go beyond 3.0 FSI, the Bathurst Street widening was required, that would be a different context.
And in that different context, it would be inappropriate to remove it from the holding provisions.
Again, subject to that being the evidence, that would be a totally different scenario. I'm not sure I can respond.
Well, I'm asking you to make an assumption and give me your opinion based on that assumption. If your answer is you don't have an opinion on whether it would be appropriate or not, that's a fair answer.
I think you're asking me to assume evidence that I don't have before me or that I don't interpret as others do, whether or not going beyond a 3 FSI would require the Bathurst Street widening and you could not go beyond that if that project did not proceed. I'm a bit confused as to why that's not the case. So if it were the case, and I would defer to the evidence of the transportation experts to understand why that would be the case.
So I'm going to, I guess, try one more time, maybe it could be phrased as giving you another chance. I would submit that as an expert, you have opinions, you're allowed to give opinion evidence I'm asking you to consider a hypothetical situation and say, in your opinion, how it would affect the plan that's before us. And I don't think it's uncommon to do that in cross-examination. And the tribunal has allowed me to ask you this question. So I'm going to ask you again to answer it.
Okay.
If you assume that the Bathurst Street widening is required to go beyond 3.0 FSI according to the transportation expert, would it be inappropriate to remove that from the holding provisions?
If the evidence were that the Bathurst Street widening were required to go beyond 3.0, you would appropriately incorporate that into the holding provisions.
That's your answer?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I think, would you agree with me that Mr. Wong also said that he was relying on the city's estimate of residents and jobs?
I do recall him referencing the information from the city, yes.
He referenced it, and he also said he was relying on that. He didn't do his own assumptions as to the number of residents and jobs.
Yes, I recall that, yes.
Okay. So if, as I've already put it to you, if the city has underestimated the number of residents and jobs, that would mean that his transportation report is has some problems because it's using the wrong numbers of residents and jobs leading to traffic, right?
Not necessarily, because the residents and jobs that are being provided, depending on how you got there, are still the residents and jobs. If the assumptions change and those numbers are higher, he's referencing thresholds that are what they are, the 10,400 and the 12,000 to 12,650 as the first threshold. So how that breaks down into actual number of units, again, I disagree. I don't think, I mean, the thresholds are the thresholds. The work to get there, they're still the thresholds that he's utilizing.
So I recall Mr. Wong saying that if the number of residents and jobs were to increase by 2,000, that would be high enough that he would want to go back and redo some of his calculations. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that specifically.
Okay. I ask you, is the number of units a more reliable estimate for the purposes of transportation? Because you know how many parking spaces there are, you have a better sense of how much traffic potentially is going to be created, as opposed to the number of residents and jobs.
In terms of traffic analysis?
Yeah.
My experience is it's a combination of units and the yield for residents, and it's also context dependent because of the demographics and persons per unit and ratios of employee space. So it usually is better data to have residents and jobs.
So the city has assumed what I say is units much larger than what you would normally expect as the average. And if there were a limit to the number of units in the KDA, would that not at least ensure that the city's calculations are closer to accurate because you're using the same number of units that the city is using?
If you were to limit the number of units, would that be a more appropriate assumption?
Yeah, if the city's population estimates are based on the number of units, why wouldn't you set the holding provisions also based on the number of units?
Well, again, it's you're undertaking your forecast based on a number of assumptions to get to the number of residents and jobs. And the number of units is not just one form of unit, it includes multiple forms of units, multiple sizes. And so there are a number of assumptions that go into that as it's broken down. So I'm not clear as to why you would limit the number of units when at the most important, as I said, the data here that is being utilized for the thresholds, which is very common, is to use resident and jobs. And that's also required by the province in terms of the density targets. They are based on residents and jobs.
Would you agree with me that if the secondary plan holding provision had a limit on the number of units, the zoning bylaw could then define units and maybe a bachelor is 0.6 units and a 3-bedroom is the equivalent of 2 units. I'm not suggesting those are the right numbers, but there's a way to do those calculations, isn't there?
There is a way to do those calculations.
Right, and it's been done before in the province of Ontario, right?
It's been done in my experience for servicing allocation. Yeah, it's been done.
Has it also been done for transportation?
I believe so in certain circumstances, yes.
Did you hear the transportation evidence that with the current modal split, the regional capital projects listed in the holding provisions are all required for 3.0 FSI? And I can add, and this might help you, and the transportation engineers assumed that all of those projects will be finished before 3.0 FSI
Yes, I
is
recall
reached.
that, yes.
Okay. So if those capital projects are required to reach 3.0 FSI, why not just set the holding provisions to require them where they are required? And if those assumptions are met, the holding provision gets released. Why would that be a problem?
Sorry, why not set the holding provisions for all of the required projects?
So instead of assuming that they're all going to be done before reaching 3.0, why not institute a holding provision that says before you reach 3.0, maybe at 2.5, we're going to do a test to ensure that all of these regional projects are complete. And if they are complete, then we're going to release the age and allow KDA to get up to 3.0.
I mean, it's an alternative approach, but again, I think the basis for this approach is the work that had been undertaken and setting out those thresholds with those capital projects in combination with the modal splits. So this is the approach that has been put forward and justified by the city.
And this approach assumes that capital projects will be completed, I guess, in the next 6 years. 2026 was the rail crossing, or it assumes it'll be completed in the next 10 years. Why do we have to make that assumption? Why not just have a holding provision that takes out that assumption altogether?
Well, I think it assumes those projects based on the understanding, but there could, as I think we heard from the transportation panel, could be changes to some of those capital projects, and it's quite possible they could be moved out. It's quite possible that other factors could affect their timing. And this is an appropriate way of putting those different elements, including the modal splits, so that there's appropriate monitoring in place.
I think that actually supports what I'm suggesting, because if there's a chance that some of these capital projects are going to be moved out and not built as assumed, then we should have a holding provision that says if that happens, there's a hold until somebody does some transportation studies and confirms that yes, the KDA can still hold 3.0 FSI if one of those projects is canceled or postponed.
But this scenario in response does that, but it's also tied to the thresholds of population and jobs. So it's allowing the area to begin to build out, because certain things as they build out will impact the modal split. I think that's the evidence that we heard.
So the plan assumes the capital projects will be completed. Your evidence that you confirm what we've heard before, that some of those projects may not actually be completed as planned. And you still say that we should not have a holding provision that takes out the assumption that they'll be completed and requires confirmation that they or something similar has been completed before reaching 3.0 FSI.
Well, the policies are quite clear, and they say that in order to accommodate the population, there are modal splits that are required, and capital projects that are to be completed to support the full build out. And that's why we have the thresholds for anything in excess of the 10,400. And that is supported by the transportation panel's evidence. And that's an appropriate policy to provide for the phasing and implementation of growth in the KDA.
I've opened up the regional plan here, and policy 5.19.
Yes,
Looking at tab 6, consecutive page 458.
yes,
And this regional plan requires orderly and efficient progression of development supported by transportation infrastructure, right?
yes.
Okay. So I'm going to put it to you that the sort of holding provision that I've proposed that removes that assumption of the capital projects being completed would be in line with this particular policy. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to move on. So I wanted to ask you to clarify a little bit the timeline and evidence regarding council's endorsement of the proposed modifications. So first, the easy question. Would you agree with me that on May 14, 2020, council advised its lawyer and staff to advise the LPAT that it supports the proposed modifications? Is that your understanding?
And this is following,
This is the May 14th meeting.
which, well, the May 14th meeting rescinded the resolution. Sorry, on May 14th, council had rescinded the May 13th resolution, I believe.
So we were given, I guess on the second day, the certified resolution from the May 14 meeting. I don't think we have it in the document book. Was it marked as an exhibit or was it to be slip sheeted in?
I believe it was to be slip sheeted.
So I don't think I can share it on my screen, but maybe should I pass up my copy to the tribunal? Is that necessary?
It was passed up to us, I believe.
Yes. Sorry, do you have it there, Ms. Anderson? I just realized.
I'm just, so what I have before me is the,
Do you have a copy of it?
so there was the staff report brought forward on May 13th. And that is the staff report that we've referred
Okay,
to.
so here's Mr. Streisfield's
Right.
copy.
It may have a note on it, but
Okay, so we're all looking at the certified resolution
Okay.
from May 14th.
Yes,
And this is where council advised its lawyer or instructed its lawyer and staff to advise the LPAT that it supports the proposed modifications, right?
yes, yes.
Okay. And you would agree with me that this is, from a planning point of view, not an amendment to the plan, right?
Mr. Chair, this line of questioning was the specific discussion of the motion that was argued before Mr. Vice Chair McCooch. And Vice Chair McCooch accepted and made a finding that this is not an amendment, it's a proposed modification to the secondary plan that's being endorsed by City Council for consideration and approval by this tribunal.
Okay. And is it the witness's opinion that the official plan amendment 8, I think this confirms what Mr. Kussner just said, official plan amendment 8 continues to be the 2017 secondary plan, right?
So you're asking me if official plan amendment 8 as modified,
No. Official plan amendment 8 as passed in 2017, that's the plan that we're talking, well, subject to proposed modifications, but it's modifications to that official plan amendment 8, right? It hasn't been amended yet.
Mr.
I'm not
Chair, before the witness answers, respectfully, it's my submission that we're now getting into jurisdictional issues that I'm concerned amount to an attempt to relitigate the motion that was argued before Vice Chair McCooch.
So
It is undisputed that the instrument that's before the tribunal, the one that was appealed, was the 2017 secondary plan as originally adopted. It's also undisputed that the proposed modifications that were endorsed by City Council are now the modifications that the city is putting before this tribunal and requesting it to approve. End of story.
I'm not trying to challenge jurisdiction. I just wanted that basis for the next question I'm going to ask. Sorry, I just need some liquid. So, Ms. Anderson, when council endorsed the 2020 modifications, this resolution we're looking at, you understand that it was in a closed meeting, right? Or in-camera meeting is another way to put it.
As is referenced, confidential closed session, yes.
And that means, and trust me, Mr. Kussner, I'm not going to go where you don't want me to go, I don't think. Nobody was allowed to be present in that meeting except for council staff and the lawyers, right?
In terms of the meeting being in camera, that's my understanding of the procedure, yes.
Okay. So we don't have any evidence of what happened in that meeting other than this resolution that we've been given, right?
This is the resolution from the closed session, yes.
Yes.
And we don't know, other than the staff report, what council considered during that meeting, do we?
I certainly don't know.
She certainly doesn't.
Right, and the reason I'm asking that, and I think this is a planning question, you're familiar with the have regard to test under section 2.1 of the Planning Act?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that it refers not only to the decision of council, but the information that was before council when it's made its decision?
It's in relation to the decision of the authority, yes.
And also the information that was before the authority when it made its decision.
By nature of it having regard to in its decision, it would consider all matters, yes.
But we don't actually know what information was before council other than the staff report with its attached appendices, right?
Correct.
We know that before council,
Well,
on the 13th was a recommendation that was then subsequently a resolution with a number of modifications that was rescinded.
so the reason I'm asking you this, is it fair to assume that whatever was before council on May 13th was before council on May 14th? Is that a fair assumption?
It's the same resolution.
Do you know, we've looked at the height analysis that was prepared by the city staff that I went through with Mr. Theodore, you know what I'm referring to?
Yes.
It shows, in theory, 60 stories.
Yes.
We don't know, or do you know whether that was before council on on May 13th?
In the in-camera session?
Even in the open session, let's assume that whatever was before them on May 13 was also before them on May 14. Was it before them on May 13?
I don't think the witness is even capable of answering these questions because I think she's already confirmed that she was not involved and did not take part in either the May 13th meeting and obviously not the May 14th meeting.
So
I don't think it's reasonable to question her on this or even make assumptions of ask her to make assumptions, what was there or was not there.
So
She doesn't know.
I do apologize if I missed this. Did you say that you did not watch the May 13th meeting?
I believe I did.
Okay.
The in-camera meeting, I did not watch. The meeting on the 13th, I did, yes.
Right.
Yes.
And there's an agenda that's online and the agenda shows everything that was before council for that meeting, right?
In terms of the staff report and the background information, yes.
I'm going to put it to you and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that the height policy document that we looked through was not one of the documents that was before council at that meeting.
I don't recall it being before that. In the staff report, no.
You're talking about the 13th meeting.
Yes, I am. That's right.
And I can confirm for the panel members that it's not part of the staff report.
Okay. Do you think it would have been important for council to know the estimated potential heights before voting on whether to adopt the secondary?
I'm going to object to the question. I don't think it's for this witness to answer what would or would not have been appropriate for city council to have before it when it made a decision, respectfully.
Okay, I will move on, assuming that the objection is agreed to by the panel. Okay. Okay. I am almost done here. So, well, we went through a lot about the planning process, and we've talked about how the secondary plan was based on the 2010 plan with a view to 2031, right?
We talked about the process, yes.
Okay. And if I understood your opinion correctly, this secondary plan should look out to 2041 because we have a new growth plan now, and York Region and well, because we have a new growth plan now, right? The secondary plan should have an eye to 2041. Is that right?
My evidence was that the plan indicates that the build out will be beyond the planning horizon and likely go beyond 2041. My evidence was that the current MCR process being undertaken by the city is currently looking to the 2041 horizon to implement the 2019 growth plan. And I did mention that based on the proposed amendment to the growth plan, both the region's MCR and other MCRs may be required, depending on transition, to actually shift to 2051.
And if the tribunal were to put the proposed modifications into effect, there's now a new rule that they can't be changed for 2 years after that, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So is it not then predetermining the
Sorry, can I? There's a rule that council may consider changes by resolution. The rule is as it applies to applicants who are seeking amendments to that secondary plan. And there's still an authority for council to accept those changes within the 2-year through resolution.
Right, that's a fair correction, I apologize. But we did talk about yesterday, once it's adopted, you can't go back and go lower than 4.0 FSI if it's adopted. So is this not actually predetermining some of the outcomes of the cities and the region's official plan review processes if it is put into force?
No, it's not predetermining. It's providing for a plan, as I have indicated, that is implementing provincial policy and establishing the appropriate framework for the KDA.
And if the LPAT puts the secondary plan into force looking out to 2041, it is, in essence, setting up a plan to 2041 that is going to have an effect on the official plan by the city and the region that are now under review, right?
Yes, to the extent that it will be one component in addition to the increased forecasted growth for both 2041 and 2051 that the city will also have to accommodate within its intensification areas.
And if the city still intends for Yonge and 16th and for Richmond Hill Center to be higher and denser than the Yonge and Bernard KDA, then this would lead them, I submit, to plan for even more than whatever is approved here in the Yonge and Bernard KDA in those other areas. Am I right?
Well, they will need to plan for more based on the fact that there's a lot more growth coming through the 2041 and soon to be the 2051. There's a continued need to expand those areas to accommodate the new planning horizon growth forecast. That's a requirement through the province.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get on is there's a roll-on effect. If you increase heights and densities in the third highest intensification area, naturally you're also going to have to increase heights and densities in the first and second highest intensification areas, right?
If you're establishing the minimum target for this area, those other areas will have to be planned in accordance with the direction here as well. Yes, it is a component of the future planning of those areas, as are many other components that will require those areas to intensify.
And your opinion is that nevertheless, it is appropriate. I'm trying to think of a way to phrase it. In light of what we've just discussed, it would be appropriate for the proposed modifications to go into force without waiting for those official plan reviews to be completed.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Are you aware of any changes to the Planning Act between 2017 and today that would require an increase in the maximum overall density of the KDA from 3.0 to 4.0?
Any specific requirements in the Planning Act?
Yes.
I would have to go and review that, but I'm not aware of any requirement in the legislation of the act.
I think it's a no. So there's no requirement to change from the 2017 proposal to the 2020
Well,
proposal. of the Planning Act.
indirectly, there are requirements in the Planning Act for official plans and zoning bylaws. There's been changes to the provisions to section 37, which may be removed, which could have an impact in terms of policies that relate to increased height and density through section 37. That's the only one I can think of that would require a change in policy. Just by experience, that example is common where municipalities have height limitations that are subject to increased height through section 37. And now with that being removed, the municipality has to determine, does it amend its official plan to go up to that height limit that would have otherwise been achieved through bonusing? I would assume that's one example of a change in the Planning Act. That's the one that comes to mind, but I can't think of any others.
Okay. And that's going to be considered, the city's working on a new community benefits bylaw and the official plan reviews. That's all going into that process.
Yes.
So before I go to the next question, I do understand your opinion that the 2020 proposed modifications are appropriate based on the new provincial policy statement, right?
Correct.
What I want to know is not just is it appropriate, is it preferable, but does the new provincial policy statement actually require the increase in density that's proposed from the 2017 plan to the 2020 plan?
Specifically require an increase in density as a stated policy. I would say collectively the policies require the plan to reflect provincial policy, as I provided the opinion that it does, and specifically the policies require that plans be kept up to date in accordance with provincial policy.
So it's appropriate to review it, but whether or not that increase is required, I suppose, isn't certain at this point.
Well, I think I've provided my opinion that it is appropriate and justified and consistent with the provincial policy statements, and it implements the direction in the provincial policy statements as it relates to intensification and complete communities.
So we already know your opinions on the growth plan, I think.
Yes.
Are you aware of any changes to the York Region official plan from 2017 to today? I know it's under review, but changes that have actually been made so far that would require the increase in density from the 2017 plan to the 2020 proposal.
I believe in my evidence I've referenced the endorsed studies and policies and directions of York Region as it relates to the minimum density targets.
So you do think it's required?
In terms of the direction, but I also referenced the fact earlier that York Region is currently undertaking its MCR work.
I don't think you're saying it's required. I think you're saying something else, and I'll accept that answer, unless you tell me I'm wrong.
Sorry, you're indicating, is there something in the York Region plan that requires?
Well, there's a suggestion in general that we had this 2017 secondary plan. There's been all these changes to planning in the province of Ontario since then. Mm-hmm. As a result, the city had to go back and reevaluate and make new proposals. That's the basic concept, isn't it?
In fairness, I don't think the witness ever testified that any of these documents require the changes. It was her opinion that they were consistent with and in conformity with, which is what the test mandate under the Planning Act. And that was her evidence.
I'm happy with that answer if she adopts it.
Yes.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you.
We'll have 15-minute break, and then Mr. Askander is on with questions.